Hello, and welcome back to The Path. This is the fourth installment of The Path. My guest today is Ulf Karlsson, a Kishimotodi practitioner from Sweden. In this installment of The Path, Karlsson Sensei and I talk about the history of his system, the differences between the mainland version and the Okinawan version, and the difference between the mainland systems and Okinawan systems in general. I first met Ulf Sensei about 2 years ago, I believe. Since that time, we've had many interesting conversations about karate. While in general, I'm not very interested in karate history, Ulf Sensei's expert knowledge and passion for it was very infectious, and I enjoyed speaking to him about the history and all the details and how he goes about collecting his information and perhaps when this book might be available. So without further ado, let's get into the podcast with Ulf Karlsson Sensei.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Ulf. Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
For people who don't know you, could you maybe perhaps give an introduction?
Okay, my name is Ulf Karlsson and I started training in 1983. And in the autumn of 1984 I started a Japanese martial art called Taido. For those not familiar with Taido, it's art created by Okinawan called Shukumine Seiken. He came to Japanese mainland in 1949 and started his own karate style called Gensuri in early 50s. And in 1965 he started this new art called Taido. And already in 1970 it came to Sweden, so I've been in Sweden quite a long time. And also in my hometown for quite a while, so it was one of the natural choices to train just where I live. So I started in 1984, and the first time I went to Japan was in the spring of 1992, which was a really interesting experience coming from the Swedish countryside and arriving in Tokyo. It's not only Disneyland, but it was an interesting experience, and we also went for a training camp in Kawaguchiko near Mount Fuji for 2 weeks training with university students. So we had a lot of interesting experience the first time we were in Japan. We also spent 6 weeks up in a city called Hirosaki up in Aomori prefecture. So all in all we spent 10 weeks and I thought it was interesting, so we returned the following year for the World Championship. And again the year after I returned for 3 months to train. And also I was doing some Japanese studies at the time, so I had a chance to do some tests and so on in Japan. And after that I was not visiting Japan for about 5 years until I had an exchange year in 1999 to 2000, where I studied at a university called Waseda in Tokyo.
And was the training that you had in Sweden when you were younger, was it more, it sounded like there was more competition?
Yes, it was modern art which is competition based, and I competed to around 1997 seriously. And it was a nice time, and after that I got interested more a little about the roots. So for instance, while I was a university student, besides training Taido in Tokyo, I also trained a little with an American, Robert Rossello, who trained for an Okinawan called Oyata Seiyu, also known as Oyata Taika. And that was interesting because I didn't really have a perception about Okinawan karate before that, because I mainly seen Japanese karate. So it was interesting to see there was more to karate than I previously knew. And I also spent some time in besides Tokyo, because my wife at that time worked in Kyoto at a university called Dojo. We had an apartment in Kyoto, so I spent a lot of time in Kyoto and Osaka, so that was also interesting. And in 2004 we went back to Sweden full time, and I didn't return to Japan until 2009. And 2009 I decided to go to Okinawa to further research the karate and the main source for Taido.
And when you arrived in Okinawa, did you have any indication or any knowledge of where you were going to go and try to do this research? Or
Yes, and one thing was I had read the book Okinawan Karate by Mark Bishop, and he trained at a dojo called Budokan. The Budokan was founded by Higa Seitok in 1951 and changed name to Budokan in 1967. But the interesting part is that Higa Seitok was also a student to the same teacher as Seiken Shugimine, and this teacher was called Kishimoto Soko. So I reached out to Mark Bishop, and we had some seminars with Mark Bishop in 2007 and 2008. 2006 as well, actually. 2006, 2007 and 2008. But unfortunately, he didn't really know any material that came from Kishimoto Soko, but he still knew a lot of material from Budokan, which was interesting. So when I arrived at Okinawa, I looked up Budokan and said that I'm coming from this background of Taido, and I'm interested in the Kishimoto Soko material. And after that, I also trained a little for Mark Bishop. So he kind of knew what I could do. So in the beginning, we tried each other out. So I came to training about every third day, and after a couple of weeks, he said, "You can come and train every day." And from that first year's experience, I thought this was quite interesting because they had another way of teaching the same material. So I decided to come back next year, and I have with me a friend from Finland called Kongisu, who had been to Budokan already in 2006, but just for one night. So they didn't really have the time to research it. And also, they came just a week after Higa Seitok passed, so they got a chance to meet with the current sensei Higa Kiyohiko, which is the son of Higa Seitok. Anyway, so from 2009 and every year we decided to go to Okinawa. So I've been now for 10 years in a row to Okinawa. The major difference is that instead of coming in September when it's still quite hot, I decided to come a little later. So the following year I came in October, and now I usually come in November. And the good thing about that is November is kind of a boring month in Sweden, which is cold and dark. But on Okinawa it's still quite warm. So November on Okinawa is like Swedish summer. So it's like a second summer for me.
yeah, exactly, it's quite nice. The humidity is gone, and the temperature has dropped. Yeah.
Exactly. So usually it's like this year I think it was 28 degrees when we came in November. That was perfect.
So there's you come from similar lineages. What was the difference between the stuff that you've done on the mainland and the stuff that you've been studying now?
Well, of course there's a lot of difference, because when he created Taido, it was from a different viewpoint, and it contained competition and so on. But some material is still the same, like you want to avoid the opponent and you want to use footwork to enter and so on. So while it was done differently, you still could see there is some technical connections. Foot position was same, the way of moving on a line, for instance, not really any wide stances. Some otherwise common stances in karate is not used, and so on. So you could see a lot of similarities as well. But in Taido, because it's a new martial arts, we didn't use the old kata. For instance, when he did Genseri, he still kept the kata from Kishimoto, which is Nahanshi, Pasai, and Kushanko. And these are still trained at Budokan, but was not taken into Taido. So material was different, and also the explanation. But you also had a lot of similarities, which I didn't expect actually when I started to train, but it's become more and more apparent over the time.
So what were the things that you thought were very similar?
Both the thinking strategy, but also the way of using the body, how to enter and so on. And was really attracted me to the way that we learned the material at Buikan is that kata and the training methods and the applications, how he explains the techniques, were really closely related. Because sometimes I can feel that kata training or form training can get really abstract, get hard to understand, and here was really well connected. And that was just not only to me but to other people coming from same background, both attracting and a little surprising. So we decided to stick around, and that's been the reason. Not only me but a few others been coming back, if not every year, so when they get a chance at least.
So is there any reason that you don't go back to the mainland as much, or?
Well, usually I go to the mainland, just not as much.
Usually before you come to Okinawa.
Yeah, and after. Yeah, we'll see how it will be in the future if they start to fly directly from Europe to Okinawa. But for now, you still have to transfer somewhere. So usually I transfer in Osaka or Tokyo. It depends on which flight route I come. But so this year I spent time in both Osaka and Tokyo before I came down to Okinawa. And on my way back, I will spend a couple of nights in Osaka again.
Oh, I see.
So yes, I still spend time on the Japanese mainland, but not as much.
I find with when there's.
So for instance, this year I was in Tokyo watching the Japanese championship for Taido, Senihon.
Oh, okay.
So yes.
I found when systems move from Okinawa to the mainland Japan, they all sort of start to take on the same sort of flavor as all the local martial arts. Like the stances become a bit longer and the movements become a bit more rigid. I guess because your system is a recent transplant. Has that happened, or is it?
No, I would say that it partly happened. Yes. Yeah, because if you think about it, he moved to Japan in 1949, and in the karate days, his main students came from other systems, such as Shotokan or Goju-ryu. So they have kind of a karate habit when they enter into Genseri. And today, I would say that Genseri looks like any mainland system, and you kind of find the same in Taido. It's more abstract, it's longer stances on. So I think it's totally correct. It's adapted to the environment.
Would you say that was a good thing or a bad thing,
or? I think like this mainly, that you cannot understand the old material just from studying the new material. If you study both the new and the old material, you can see the relationships, but you can't really learn the old material from just studying the new. I don't think it's possible. You need to see both to see the connections.
So I'm not too familiar with your system. How does it sort of fit into the? They always talk about Goju-ryu, Uechi-ryu, and Shorin-ryu as being the big three on Okinawa. How does your system fit in? Does it fit into that sort of categorization, or?
Well, for me, not really, because the closer would be Shorin-ryu based on that we do in. If we talk about what I do today, I do something we call the Kishimotodi, which is basically the material from Kishimoto Soko as transferred by Higa Seitoku lineage and Shugumine Sensei lineage. Kishimoto Soko trained in the roughly directly after the Ryukyu Kingdom ended, and the Ryukyu Kingdom ended in 1879. So he trained somewhere between 1879 and 1900, and you didn't really have that shape of karate back then. You might not even have the name karate back then, actually, or to the Chinese hand or empty hand. So probably they just call it te, which is one of the reasons we call it Kishimoto T. So what they say is an old form of shuri te, meaning the material had come from the area of shuri. But beyond that, we don't really know. So if we would categorize it, we'd probably say it's all form of shurite, and the kata base is Nahan Shipasai Kushanku.
So would you think the system is mostly based on kata?
Well, I wouldn't say that in reality, but that's the kata is kind of a time capsule. It's easier it's easier to keep in one way than lose techniques, because I mean, even if many of the training methods and applications survive, maybe kata is a good way to conserve it, because I think back in the day, like when Kishimoto has students, even if we talk about Hikasei Toko, Kishimoto Soko, or whoever in this lineage, they mainly train one-on-one. But today you usually have bigger groups. I don't say it's quite small groups on Okinawa even today, because you have many dojos in Naha. I heard somewhere that there is 300 dojos in Naha. Most of them are not big. There are a few really big dojos, but while it's not that many students, it's not the same one-on-one training. So some of the exercises described that Kishimoto Soko did for his teacher, or Higasei Toko or Shugumine did for Kishimoto Soko, probably haven't survived, even if they're described in text, because we don't do same exercises today. So in that way, I think, yes, you could say in a way that it's quite kata based.
Okay. So what would an evening of training in your dojo look like at the Naha dojo?
Well, it's also different, but if we take it regular Kishimotodi training, maybe we spend 20 minutes on correcting kata, because you mainly want the kata training to be done in private on your own, and from there on you will do exercises with a partner, so you will do two-man exercises regularly.
And when you do a two-man exercise, is it working on like application, or what are you trying to achieve by working with a partner?
Yeah, usually we train on entering or applications, different skill drills usually, yes.
Okay. And how long would a typical training session last?
Well, usually we might train 1 hour to 2 hours, but say 1.5 hours usually. So say that 25 to 30 minutes is on kata and the rest is pair based.
Oh, okay.
And depending on the need, warm up and warm down. But usually for the Kishimotodi training, which might differ from regular sports training, we try to have as much of the kata training done by the person at home as possible, and the same with stretching or strength training or whatever. It's a personal responsibility. So when we gather, we try to do pair exercises as much as possible, because it's a good chance when we meet.
Yeah, it's an efficient use of people's time. If you can train on your own, it's get that thing done. And
yes, and also usually people have different requirement. What are the weakness and strengths? What are the stiffness and good parts? So of course we help each other out and select exercises on if need be, but we try to not take time from the training for that if possible. And that might differ from how you would do in a sports session, because then you might include like running or strength training and stretching. And
I think traditional dojos, they tend to work like that. I think all the ones I've had come in contact with, they're always even some dojos, the warm-ups are done, you come in 20 minutes early and then you do the warm-ups before the class starts, because they don't want to waste any time doing warm-ups during class.
Yes, and also I kind of feel that it's a more relaxed thing on Okinawa, that time, because people come when they have the time. Partly because it's a specialized place, so people can drop in instead of having certain times to fit in. So yes, you have the structure that people might drop in from half hour late to a half hour early, and because of this difference in when they arrive, it's hard to have this collective warm up as well.
Yeah, that's true.
But I kind of think it's a system that fits here, partly because of island time, but also because even in a stress society, you suspect people want to train, so when they come, they're welcome.
And I know that most dojos in Okinawan are quite small. How many local people might be training on a given night at your dojo?
Oh, it's so different actually. I mean, I think this year's smallest group, we were only 3, and that was actually on Christmas evening.
Okay.
There was a little few people attending that time, and when they have bigger gatherings, I think I've seen maybe 60, but that's not regular as well. So, say maybe we're between 10 and 15. Say maybe between 5 and 15 actually. It can be because we have training every night, so not everyone can make it every night. So
Yeah,
I would say probably more people on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday actually regularly coming. But yeah, I've seen both 5 and 15, and at some gatherings we get really many, even if not everyone take part on the tatami at the same time.
So maybe we'll talk a little bit about Hojo Undo, like Makiwara and Chishi. Do you guys do much of that, or is it taught, or?
Actually, we don't do much of this, and that's also quite interesting because I think it was more usual in the before and until the 1960s, and I think actually been cut out of the program, both at Budokan and at Taido. And it's sometimes it's hard to tell why.
Modern times.
Yeah, probably. They still have some Hoyo Undo equipment and this, but there's not really a big drive for it. It's more, again, personal responsibility. So a few people work out with it, but it's not like demanded at dojo time, no.
Yeah, unless you have that equipment at your house, the dojo is pretty much the only place you can do those kind of exercises and training.
Yes, that's true. So yeah, there are a few of the Hojo Undo equipment, and there are a few people using them, but it's not like sensei spend any time on. You probably would have to ask for instruction if you want to learn it.
I see. So perhaps we could move on to. I think from talking to you before, you were saying that your 2 teachers came from the same system, but actually weren't in the dojo at the same time.
That's correct. It's in a way it's interesting. Kishimoto Soko lived between 1869 and 1945, and funnily enough, Higa Seitoko trained from about 1932 to 1937, and Sugimine Sensei trained between 1939 and 1944. So they trained roughly 4 to 5 years, both of them, but not on the same time. So during the war, when Sugimine was still, because he's a little younger, was a student of Kishimoto, Higa Seitoko was actually in Tokyo studying to become a lawyer, and did exhibition with, for instance, Toyama Kanken, which he knew, and later also got a diploma from, which gave him right to make Shinsa here in Okinawa. But that's for another story. So he was in Tokyo during the war, or Japan mainland. And then after the war, he was in Kumamoto on his first work as a lawyer. or barrister. I don't know actually which title they use here.
Bengoshi, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so he was in Kumamoto and came back to Okinawa in 1950. So after the war, Shugimine was first on Okinawa, and then he went up to Itoshi in Shizuoka in 1949. So they didn't meet. And then basically Higa Seitoku, besides visiting Kumamoto in 1960 somewhere, stayed on Okinawa, and Shugimine was on the mainland. So Higa Seitoku actually mentioned visiting Tokyo and went to the tide office at one point, but at that time Shugimine Sensei was not in, so they never met. And it's same with my current sensei. He had never met Shugimine Sensei either. But I know that my sensei's wife knew Shugimine's wife because they met in Tokyo. So actually it's never been a real transfer between the two students who survived the war of Kishimoto Soko, which in a way is good for research, but it's still strange they never met.
Yeah. Did you think there was any differences between the two lineages that could be explained by difference in when they learned the material from the teacher? Or?
That's fully possible because not everything is identical, and it could be that Kishimoto Soko taught a little differently at the different times. It's fully possible. That's one explanation. And one thing that's struck us over the years is that while there's some differences in the kata, like left first then right, or right first then left, the most strange places they usually do the same. Like that must be a mistake, but then both do it, so it can't be a mistake. So we have to work from what we know. But it's good to have two sources to cross-reference between. Which is make it kind of interesting that there is only two sources, but at least we have two sources. So that makes it interesting actually to have for conversation. Yeah, let's go back in time. So we know both from Shugimine Seiken and Higa Seitoku what kind of material basically was learned. And it's mainly the same, but also Shugimine Seiken never talked about what teacher Kishimoto Soko had, and we don't know why actually, but he never mentioned that. Maybe he was, when he was young, he was not interested in history, so never asked. Could be that easy. But according to Higa Seitoku, the teacher for Kishimoto Soko was a teacher called Bushi Tachimura. And while there are several Tachimura families, we are not totally sure which this person were yet. The research continues. We have a few favorite names that we try to establish if it's correct or not. And the first name's father and grandfather was gods at the Tamaudun, which is the royal burial site, which they probably used a bow. I'm not sure defend is the right word, but guard at least.
Watch over.
Yes. So it's an interesting family if we got the right person. And also in the writing of Funakoshi Gichin from 1914 in an article called Okinawan no Bugi, it's mentioned that Tachimura's father, Bushi Tachimura, was a student to Tode Sakugawa. And again, it's not confirmed yet that this is historically correct, but we're trying to confirm it. And there's many ideas. Some people think that Tode Sakugawa was really Sakugawa Kanga, and it's fully possible. We don't know. But as I said, if it's correct, so we have a lineage of Sakugawa Kanga, Bushi Tachimura, Kishimoto Soko, Higa Seitoku, and Seiken Shugimine, which spans 150 years in quite a a few numbers of people, few generations for this material. So basically it could be that Nahanshi, Pasai and Kushanku comes from Toda Sakugawa. It's not proven, but it's a possibility.
So you're mentioning other people who are doing this research with you?
Yes, of course, we try to have help from as many as possible actually, but I would like to mention a few. One is Andreas Quast from Germany, who has been a great help in translating some material and also been a source of information of old Okinawa. And another great help has been from Motobu Naoki sensei from Osaka, who's the grandson of Motobu Shoki, which is quite famous for his karate. I usually try to visit the Motobu family when I pass through Osaka, partly to discuss history, but also I trained a couple of times with them to better understand the technical difference of the Kempo, the Motobu Kempo that his grandfather did, and the Motobu Dundi that Motobu Shoyo, who was the older brother of Motobu Shoki, did. And it's been both interesting and make me understand the material better. But to come back to whatever we talked about,
the historical
yes,
relations?
Yeah, exactly. So while it's not really been proved yet, one theory is that Toda Sakugawa also was the teacher to a famous guy called Matsumura Sokon, which definitely existed and taught a lot of kata, including Goju Shiho and Kushanku and Nahanshi. So if Matsumura Sokon also got Nahanshi, Pasai and Kushanku from Toda Sakugawa, we have a common source in Sakugawa Kanga, which is just a theory of yet, but that's what we're working with, because you need some kind of starting point, yeah, for the research. And another person who helped us a lot is Kian Morikazu from Okinawa, who helped us with the research greatly. Among other, he introduced us to Gibo Sensei, who researched about the Motobu area and the Nago area, and found out some material about Kishimoto Soko, and also found out some material about the Tachimura family, which helped us a lot in our research. And while we only met Gibo Sensei twice, he was a professor, I would say, because I think he's retired now. He's a little older gentleman. That research that he did was greatly helpful, and these are a few of the people who helped out. And also, like I said, mentioned before, Kongi helped out because he speaks Chinese, so he done some research on his Chinese sources, so that also helped greatly.
I would imagine that old Japanese, Chinese, and Hogan would all your articles and evidence would probably be written in one of those three languages. So.
Yes, and sometimes a mix actually. Yes, and it's true, and that's where these talented people come in, because you need both to understand the language, but you also need to understand the context, the time this was written in. And I would say, I mean, because of these people, I gradually come to a better understanding of the material. But I would say that I try to get other people to make the translations, because they're more talented when it comes to languages than me, and I think that Andreas Quast does a really good translation, and Motobu Naoki Sensei are good both at language but also at contextual understanding. And there are several people that are good at translating, so I think like Mario McKenna and Joe Swift, yeah. Mark Tankovic, or Free, for instance, that I think does good translations, which rather prefer day work than me, to be honest. Not only because I'm lazy, because I think they're doing a better job than I do.
So you don't enjoy the work, but you feel that it has to be done?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to certain areas, you have to dig yourself, because the main population research might not be interested. So there I try, but I would say, I mean, translation-wise, I think it's better to get people who are good at the skill of translating to do it. And as I said, sometimes the problem is that if you take your regular Japanese translating some material from Okinawa, they sometimes make mistake because they don't have the same cultural understanding or time understanding.
Or even the kanji how the kanji is read.
Yeah, exactly, because naming on Okinawa can be quite unique at times. A great example is just the place name of Kin, where the N is actually the kanji for bu, or martial art. So it's actually impossible to read in Japanese because it's a very local thing. And of course, if we then start talk about the spoken language of Okinawa, when you had besides the Okinawan language, you have dialects. So the outer islands might not be comprehensible to the Okinawans, and inside Okinawa you had like the royal dialect, which the Shuri dialect, and above that I think even the royals had their own kind of language. So I think maybe it's sometimes quite hard to get a good understanding of material even for people speaking good Japanese.
So you speak Japanese quite well. How did you learn that?
Well, I wouldn't really say I speak Japanese very well, but somehow I can speak about strange things in martial art history and miss out in regular conversation. But I started studying when I was in university, so I studied Japanese at first it was in Växjö University, and then in Göteborg University, and then in Lund University, and then I had a exchange year when I was in Waseda, Tokyo, but not for language studies, but I did a little Japanese studies anyway. So I studied Japanese at the university. That's basically where I got the first introduction to Japanese, and then with living in Japan some, visiting Japan some, and speaking Japanese, it's got gradually better. But I will say now it's going the other way, because I'm gradually forgetting Japanese, so I might have to go back to some basic studies actually.
So let's tie the Japanese language into learning karate. How important do you think it is to be able to at least understand Japanese when you're learning?
Well, actually it depends, because in a way I don't think you need the language for the skill of karate at all. But as it is today, when I visit people in Okinawa, Japan, it's if they can't explain it in English or Swedish in this case, I need to be able to speak Japanese. So to decipher the teachers of today, I think important, but otherwise I think there are two separate skills. You didn't necessarily have to speak English to understand cricket, so I'm not sure you need Japanese for karate, to be honest. I mean, the Okinawans sometimes say you need to understand Okinawan to understand karate. So
I'm a bit more staunch in my belief that to understand it well, to understand karate at the level I always wanted to understand it, you needed to speak at least Japanese. Hogan probably would be better, but
well, I agree with you. To get the information from the people you want to study with, you do that. But I'm not sure actually that the martial art as a skill is that depending on the language.
No, I just meant for learning.
Yes.
being a practitioner and learning.
But I agree. I mean, if you want to read the source material, if you want to be able to talk with the older people who have the experience and done this for a long time, it definitely helps to speak the language. And so yes, today I would agree. If you want to kind of research the material, I think you need some language training to be able to penetrate the subject.
And it builds, I find it builds quite a bit of trust with the teacher as well. If you put the time into even learning basic phrases and things like that, they take it as a good sign that you're quite serious.
Yeah, I mean, as a tip, I think it's a good idea. And also, most teachers think of karate as a part of their culture. Mm-hmm. And of course they appreciate it if you take more time to learn the culture better. So yes, I would agree.
Yeah, the language is a big part of the culture.
Yes, so yeah, absolutely. That I totally agree with. And nothing really stops you from doing it except time.
Yes, yeah. Everybody's quite busy nowadays. So what time are we at now? Well, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I can edit this part, so.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about next?
What haven't we covered? Or
you have some rubber bands on your forearm.
Let's add it up. Should we go back to history, or is it enough? Should we go back for more general karate history?
What are your opinions on the differences between Okinawan and mainland stuff? You got any thoughts on that, or?
I thought we covered quite well with it being rather abstract. Okay.
Or what are you thinking?
Well, if we go back a little to talk about karate history, I think one interesting thing is that, of course, you have to look at it at the context of the time, but with the introduction of karate into the schools, it kind of took on a new appearance. And you could say that people like Itosu Anko and Hanashiro Shomo and Yabu Kentsu were spearheading this introduction of karate into schools, and they also introduced more kata into the system. Like, it's hard to say, but probably before that people usually did 2 to 5 kata maybe, and when they started to introduce the school, it also introduced 5 different kata called Pinan, Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, Yondan and Godan, as well as probably before that there was 1 Nahanshi kata, and he introduced Nahanshi, Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, 3 of them. And probably before that people did only their Pasai, they did 1 Pasai, and he introduced Pasai Sho and Dai, small and big. It's just a way of differentiate the Pasai. And the same with Kushanku. Probably people only did 1 Kushanku, and he introduced Kushanku Sho and Dai. And it's said by a researcher called Kinyo Hiroshi, which he got from one of Itosu's students called Tokuda Ambun, that the school material was basically these kata, Nahanshi, Ichi-Nisan, Pinan, from 1 to 5, Pasai, Sho and Dai, Kushanku, Sho and Dai, Shinto, and Goju Shiho, this 14 kata. And it's interesting how it from there became more and more usual with many kata in the style, and you have people learning quite many kata from there on. Some system has very many, like Mabuni Kenwa is quite known for having many kata, and he named 33 kata in a publication in the late 1930s. Today some say they have more than 50 kata in Shitori, but it might be an ever-growing list. The same with Funakoshi Gichin when he came to Okinawa. Came from Okinawa to Tokyo in 1922. They talk about his teaching about 15 kata, and today most Shotokan is teaching 26 kata as a standard. If we look at these kata, we know that, for instance, we know that Matsumura Sokon taught Goju Shiho and Kushanko and Nahanshi, for instance. We also know that quite many people taught Nahanshi, Pasai, Kushanko before year 1900. But what we can say is probably there was only everyone was only doing their version, one version of each kata before the school introduction. So it's quite interesting to follow what kata is actually older than the school introduction. So we have other systems like you talked about before with Nahate or Gojiri, which seems that if you take the sister system Toanri on mainland Japan from Kyoda Yuhatsu, he has 4 kata from Higona, while Miyagi Shoyun, they have like 12 kata.
Something like that,
yeah. So it seems like Miyagi Shoyun was a very prolific and collected and created a few more. We also see, like for instance, you mentioned the system Koeshiri, and traditionally they had 3 kata, and then they decided to expand it to 7 kata. Some say it was because they felt they needed more to fill out the time when they did exhibitions, and so it's been a trend with getting more and more kata material.
Do you think that trend is just to fill up the time more, or why do you think all these karate systems started moving towards more kata at the is it post-war period that they decided to do this, or?
I think the trend started with the inclusion in school and have just continued, and maybe it was more obviously after the war, and I think one reason might be a competition, actually, that you want more material to compete with, but of course I think also with in the 1930s they started to speak of karate as rihab, because when it became introduced to Japan, Japanese asked for which kind of lineage is it, which kind of school is it. So from the 1930s you start to see that you get schools like Goju-ryu and Shorin-ryu. And so Shorin-ryu was named by Shibana Shoshin, which was a student of Itosu Anko. And he actually went from Itosu Anko's kata, at least 14 school kata, to just 13 kata because he dropped the Goju Shiho. So he is one of few who actually cut back on kata, which is also an interesting detail. But you see with these Niriha that many of them kind of snowballed, getting more and more kata over time. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it tends to be the way when you take a kata, you transform it to fit your school's preferences. I suppose it can be a good thing, or it could have the problem where you get to a time where it's almost too many kata and you spend more time learning new material than actually train what you already know.
Yeah, that would be my opinion on it. Too many kata would be I'm not going to say a waste of time, but you're getting to a point where you're trying to balance, like
remembering training to, yeah.
And then, well, even just, is it cutting into my 2-man practice, or like other things I could be practicing that my time could be better spent doing?
Yes, and as I said, I mean, the Kishimotodi I do today is quite small with just 4 kata. It's the classic 3, Nahanshi, Pasai, Kushanko, and the kata we call Nidanbu, which is kind of a help kata, which have parts from all the other 3. Done in a slightly different way to further the understanding. But when I compare it with many other systems, I see that I actually sometimes think that 4 kata is too many But besides that, I'm happy I don't have many more kata to try to conserve or train or remember. But we can also see that many of the smaller systems either grow big or disappear, like we had the Ishimine Ri, which I think is actually died out today, which just had 3 kata. It had a Sanshin, a Nahanshin, and a Pasai, but we looked for it, but we don't seem to find anyone who still remember it. So it might be that smaller system has less sellability, and therefore either get eaten up by bigger system or just vanish.
Do you have any? I think if I was to guess at an average for a modern karate system in Okinawa, I'd guess between 15 and 20 kata.
Yeah, but you have many dojos who have many more kata.
Yeah,
the Uema dojo, Shubukan, is quite famous for having more than 50, I think. And
50 something.
Yeah, and I would say where I go to train the Kishimotodi material, beside Kishimotodi and Bukan, they have Yamane-ri, which have a certain amount of kata, and Motobudunni, which don't have many kata. They have the Hanashiro karate, which have quite many kata, so they probably have close to 50 as well. And I think pretty many other schools also over the years collected quite many kata. I think originally because they were interested in learning what was available on the other side of the fence, but there comes a time when can we really teach all this material in a way so it doesn't get corrupt by the other material. I mean, you mix it into one shambo.
I think I know in Goju-do, to do like the whole kata syllabus takes about, if you just do one kata after another, it takes about 20 minutes. So if you got 50 kata, it's not likely that you're going to finish it in every lesson doing them all.
That is probably true.
Yeah.
So you would have to spend quite a lot of time just to get through them. I mean, if I do all my 4 kata, it would take 3.5 minutes. So time-wise, it might seem so much, but it's still quite much material when you start to look at everything in it, and that's the question. If you have many kata, is there much repetition, or is everything unique? It's hard to say, because I think that differs from system to system.
Mm-hmm. Even in Goju-do, I would say there's a lot of overlap of techniques between katas.
Yeah, probably are.
Yeah.
But it's still interesting to. What I mean is that if you look, for instance, at Kian Shotoku, who trained for several teachers, so he has like 7 kata from 6 different teachers, I think. And today you probably wouldn't see that it's different sources. So the question is, were they the same all the time, or have they been streamlined to be like one system? And that's also a question I sometimes have when I look at our kata. Is like, if it's different from other, for instance, if you take one kata like Kushanku, if that's different, because of course all Kushanku is quite similar, so you see the common ancestry, but in the details that differ is like, have we changed that to be so streamlined in our training method, or has it been changed by in the other lineages? And while it's not maybe possible to be certain about, you can always have the ideas that, oh, it looks like this or like that, so probably that's the reason why.